question for you about a passage I was working on recently. 1 John chapter 4, verses 1 through 6. And John is, this is about sort of the authority of the church. What authority does the church have as a theological criterion, if you will? Because in 1 John chapter 4, verses 1 through 6, John basically appears to give us two tests for discerning the spirit of truth versus the spirit of falsehood. The first test he gives us is verse 2, every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God, but every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus is not from God. But then he goes down in verse 5 and gives us another test, or verse 6, excuse me. We are from God, and whoever knows God listens to us. But whoever is not from God does not listen to us. And so I was working with that and thinking through that, and it does seem that John is sort of holding up the, how do you want to put it, the Spirit-infused church as a kind of theological criterion by which these Christians are going to be able to discern the spirit of truth from the spirit of falsehood. And
well, in his particular context, which is a fairly narrow context, because I mean, you have to keep this in balance with Paul in Galatians 1 and 2. So you have two different kinds of what we would call heresy being involved here, and you can tell this from looking at verse 2. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. Except the Judaizers in Galatia also believe that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. That means they're from God, right? No, it doesn't mean they're from God. They had one element of truth, but they denied another element someplace over here. And so what I'm saying is sometimes what we do is we take a text of Scripture that had a particular context in the early church. 1 John has a specific context in regards to proto-Gnosticism, the early Docetics, the specific heretics that John is dealing with are not the Judaizers in Galatia. And so sometimes we'll take that and attempt to build a large interpretive base off of that and make large conclusions, when the reality is we need to get general conclusions. Here is a key issue in this context. This apostle at this time said this to this group, and therefore we can make that application, but that needs to be put side by side with what this apostle over here said to the Judaizers, and what Peter said over here in regards to this group over here, and like in 2 Peter. And that gives us a much more balanced and full view than if we just focus upon just one. You see what I'm saying? So when you say Spirit-infused church, well, yeah, except that the content of verse 2 is a theological content that is explicated in other books other than 1 John. There's an assumption that there is a body of revelation and truth that is already embraced by the people, and that the Gnostics, because of their denial of who Christ is, though they claim to speak with authority, are in point of fact contradicting fundamental elements of that. It does lead you to the issue of interpretation. Because you're at a later point in time here, and you've probably, with John, only got one apostle left at this particular point in time. But every attempted solution to the necessity of interpretation in the presence of heresy that has attempted to erect a structure outside of Scripture has led to more heresy itself. And so when the early church, in fighting the Gnostics, would go beyond what God had given to the church to prosecute that argument, they ended up actually laying the foundation for later heresies that they could not have imagined. And so we have to learn from that. I mean, if we can't look back if we can't notice what's going on in Rome today and go, hey, building up a whole tradition like that eventually has you dogmatizing things like the bodily assumption of Mary that not a single apostle of Jesus Christ ever even thought of or taught as part of the gospel is now part of the gospel, might be a dangerous thing to do. The Roman Catholic apologist gets away with sort of ignoring that rather glaring historical reality, but it started small. It didn't, bodily assumption of Mary didn't just, drop out of heaven someplace. There was a process whereby this whole organization came into being that can allow that kind of thing to be added to the gospel of Jesus Christ. So looking at all of Scripture and balancing that out, I think, is the way to do it. Okay?
Okay. Yeah.
I know there's a lot more to be said there, but we went 3 minutes past just for you anyways.
Oh, well, thank you.
All righty, man. Thanks for your call.